Hi everybody, I'm Heath, and in this video I'd like to talk to you about some of the best wood elf miniatures that I have found that I feel most accurately represent the elves of Mirkwood as they appear according to the books in Middle-earth. So first, let's go over a little bit about what we know regarding the appearance of the Mirkwood elves according to the text of the books. And actually, you might expect we would learn a little bit about that from Legolas, but actually, in The Lord of the Rings, we have very little information about the elves of Mirkwood. We do have this passage right here, which talks about how Legolas is garbed. There was a strange elf clad in green and brown, Legolas, a messenger from his father, and that's from the Fellowship of the Ring, the Council of Elrond. So we know he dresses in green and brown, which seems appropriate for these elves living in the wood. Very classic wood elf after all. But that's really all the information that we have that we could even tentatively kind of apply back to the entire Mirkwood realm. Now, of course, in The Hobbit, there is a lot more about the elves of Mirkwood in general. From The Hobbit: there were many people there, elvish-looking folk, all dressed in green and brown, and sitting on sawn rings of the felled trees in a great circle. There was a fire in their midst, and there were torches fastened to some of the trees around about. But most splendid sight of all, they were eating and drinking and laughing merrily. This does directly connect the green and brown, sort of their color scheme, for the elves of the wood. I also think that it's interesting that they are sitting on rings of felled trees, so obviously they don't mind cutting down trees in order to create their clearings and build things from it. Later, we are told the feast that they saw now was greater and more magnificent than before, and at the head of a long line of feasters sat a woodland king with a crown of leaves upon his golden hair, very much like Bombur had described the figure in his dream. The elvish folk were passing bowls from hand to hand and across the fires, and some were harping and many were singing. Their gleaming hair was twined with flowers, green and white gems glinted in their collars and their belts, and their faces and their songs were filled with mirth. Loud and clear and fair were their songs. So we've got gleaming hair here, twined with flowers. We have the golden hair of the king. We've got the green and white gems glinting on their collars and on their belts. And I think the green and white gems are the most interesting part of this passage because it kind of gives us a glimpse into what I think of as their court clothes, because they are dining with the woodland king here. So we've got the green and brown that kind of implies to me, you know, the working field clothes of the scouts and all of that. But then also here we've got the collars and belts with green and white gems, which is for dressing up for court, perhaps. Out leapt wood elves with their bows and spears, and called the dwarves to halt. So now we start to get an idea of the armament of the wood elves. We've got bows, classic wood elf, of course, but then we also have spears. So spearmen should be in the ranks of the Mirkwood elves. We have a little bit of information on the Elven King here. In a great hall with pillars hewn out of the living stone sat the Elven King on a chair of carven wood. On his head was a crown of berries and red leaves, for the autumn was come again. In the spring he wore a crown of woodland flowers. In his hand he held a carven oak staff, or staff of oak. Here we have another passage dealing with how they are armed. Before long they could see that both men of the lake armed as if for war and elvish bowmen were among them. So we do have elvish bowmen that come to the Lonely Mountain. The next morning, early, a company of spearmen was seen crossing the river and marching up to the valley. They bore with them the green banner of the Elven King and the blue banner of the lake, and they advanced until they stood right before the wall of the gate. So we do have a green banner, probably not solid green, but I mean could be, but I think of it as predominantly green being seen from a distance. Probably the same thing with the blue banner from the lake, and we have spearmen once again being mentioned. Here we've got elves in battle. The elves were the first to charge. Their hatred for the goblins is cold and bitter. Their spears and swords shone in the gloom with a gleam of chill flame. So deadly was the wrath of the hands that held them. As soon as the host of their enemies was dense in the valley, they sent against it a shower of arrows, and each flickered as it fled, as if with stinging fire. Behind the arrows 1,000 of their spearmen leapt down and charged. The yells were deafening. The rocks were stained black with goblin blood. And so that mentions all three of the things that I think should be included in the armament of the wood elves of Mirkwood: swords, spears, and bows. I think that if you're going to have a Mirkwood troop, you've got to have spears, swords, and bows represented among the warriors. So what miniatures did I go with to represent my elves of Mirkwood? Well, once again, I went with Thunderbolt Mountain. I love these elves as well. I like that they are slim. They're not real bulky miniatures, and I don't think elves should be, so you get this very slender elven look here. Of course, the miniatures are a little bit more delicate because of that, but I think that's okay. We've got swordsmen here. We've got their shields represented. I dressed them in green and brown, predominantly as their color scheme. I love the fact that you've got the leaves around, their collars for their hoods, and also around their tunics, and even around their boots. I think it's fantastic. We've got swords, we've got spears, we've got bows as well, so that represents all of the armament that I think Merkwood should have. They've got helmets on. They use a lot of scale armor, which I think is appropriate for Middle-earth as it's represented in the book. I like a much more Dark Age kind of look and not a lot of plate armor or any kind of plate armor. And so I think that the scales, and the scales that can look like leaves as well, is a very great elven touch. We might have bits of lamellar represented here with these elves. We've got, even a leaf kind of thing in their cheek plate on their helmets. So it looks like they've taken a lot of care in creating their war gear, like I think that the elves should, so they look elegant. I really like these elves. So when I was putting together a troop of elves to represent kind of a Mirkwood war band, man, it has to be these guys, I think, definitely. So once again, a shout out here to Thunderbolt Mountain for what I think are some fantastic representations of elves for Mirkwood if you're going for a kind of by-the-book look, at least as close as we can get it based on the knowledge that we have of what the elves of Mirkwood look like and how they fight. What about you? Have you found other miniatures that are great at representing the elves of Mirkwood or other cultures of Middle-earth as they are represented in the books? If you have, please let me know in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and all of that jazz. It really helps a lot. But also, please check out The Cultists, the web series on this channel about modern-day D&D playing Lovecraftian cultists who just want to worship Cthulhu in a world full of people who just don't understand. Season 1 is on the channel now. But also, please check out my YouTube channel. I have over 150 videos on tabletop games and the fantasy genre. If you've enjoyed this video, you might enjoy many of them as well. I look forward to seeing you for them and many more videos to come.